Some stories are told to inspire faith. Others are told to hide what really happened. The Book of Esther is both. And once you understand what's hidden between its lines, you'll never read history the same way again. So I was reading about this really old manuscript, one of the first books from the Israelites. It had this yellow scroll and was part of the Old Testament. On it was the name Esther, who was this Jewish queen known for her beauty and for saving her people from the Persians. Her story was passed down for thousands of years, and then the manuscript kind of vanished and later turned up again with different groups of people. It got me thinking about the Book of Esther and what her story is really about. She was this captivating queen, right? But I also wonder why some biblical books, like the ones about Esther, get so much attention compared to other parts of the Old and New Testaments. Is it because her story is about saving the Jews, or is there something more going on with Mordecai and his role in it all? It just feels like there's more to it than what's on the surface.
So there's this really old Hebrew manuscript that's been getting a lot of attention lately. It turns out there's a deep reason why Jewish groups are so keen to find it, and it's tied to some things that have been going on quietly for a long time. It all connects back to the Book of Esther and the bigger story of the Old and New Testaments. And honestly, it feels like there's still more unfolding even now.
You might have heard about United Hatzalah, a Jewish volunteer group that sent about 40 people to help with rescue work in southern Turkey. They were supposed to stay for 10 days, but they ended up cutting their trip short, saying there was a real and urgent danger. Later, it came out that the Israeli team wasn't just there to help. While they were in Antakya, they apparently took an Old Testament scroll from the ruins of a synagogue that had collapsed and brought it back to Tel Aviv.
This particular manuscript is one of the 5 major texts in Jewish heritage, after the Book of Thunder, the Song of Songs, Ecclesiastes, and the Book of Lamentations. The community already possesses the other 4 manuscripts, but the Book of Esther is so important it has not yet been returned to them.
So this is one of the most mysterious and deeply referenced parts of Hebrew history. And today, I finally got to include it with the 4 main manuscripts. It really makes you wonder what the secret is behind this one, and why Jewish tradition holds it so close alongside those other 4. The Book of Esther is part of the Tanakh, which, together with the Torah, makes up the holy book for Jewish people. It covers all kinds of customs, beliefs, and traditions, and it also tells the story of the Jewish people, including their early plans and that alliance with the Magian Persians. That connection between Jews and Persians goes back 2,000 years, and it's a fact that's hard to ignore. Even though the book talks about a Jewish queen named Esther, the political secrets in it run a lot deeper. So let's go back for a minute to around 475 BC to the palace of the Persian king Ahasuerus, whose empire stretched all the way from India to Kush.
Back when Babylon was in charge, the whole region ended up under the control of the Persian king Cherush, who was the grandson of Cyrus the Great. Things had gotten pretty rough for the Jewish people after God's anger came down through Nebuchadnezzar, one of those 4 big kings of the earth. He wasn't exactly known for his mercy, and honestly, it felt like God hadn't put much compassion in his heart either. That whole period lasted all the way into the time of Xerxes, who you might know from the Old Testament as Ahasuerus. He threw this massive feast for all his top officials and servants in the Persian army, and it just kept going for 180 days of pure luxury and excess. Once that was over, he decided to host another celebration, this time for everyone in Susa, from the most important folks down to the regular people. On the 7th day, the king had plenty of wine in him and was feeling pretty loose from all the partying. So he told his eunuchs to bring in the princess of the time, Shadi, because he wanted to show her off to all his guests, leaders, and common people alike.
The queen said no,
She wanted to do things her own way instead of just following the king's orders. She wasn't interested in showing off her looks for a crowd, which is pretty different from how some people today seem to compete for attention on screen. That made the king really angry, so he kicked her out of the palace and took her royal status away. He wanted to make an example out of her, to show other women they had to listen to him.
After that, they started gathering young women from all over for the king. These women were brought to the eunuchs' houses, where they were pampered with oils and perfumes. The eunuchs were basically in charge of looking after the women in the Persian court. There was this Jewish guy named Mordecai, living in the palace city of Susa. He worked as a guard at the gate and was raising his cousin, a girl named Hadassah. She was said to be incredibly beautiful, more so than anyone the Persians had ever seen.
Her Persian name was Esther, which I think means star. After she lost both her parents, her cousin Mordecai basically raised her as his own. When the king was looking for someone new after Vashti, Mordecai saw a chance. He put Esther forward with the other young women, hoping she could somehow help the Jewish people from inside the palace. Esther went along with it and kept her background a secret, just like Mordecai told her to. She didn't let anyone know she was Jewish, so to everyone around her, she was just another Persian girl. That way, she could be like a quiet helper for her people, right where decisions were being made. Over time, Esther really caught the king's attention. She had this graceful, charming way about her that he couldn't resist. And that's how her story really took off. She won his heart, and he started listening when she asked him for things.
Things in Persia really took a turn under her watch. The kingdom basically ended up being run by Mordecai, but he gave his orders through Esther, who was the king's beautiful companion. There were these two officials who really had it out for the Jewish people, so Mordecai came up with a scheme to deal with them. Esther saw the plan through, and it ended with one of them being executed right at the palace gate. That's when Haman, the son of Hammedatha for Agag, stepped into their position.
Haman was tight with the Persian king, and everyone who worked at the king's gate would bow down to show him respect. But Mordecai, whenever he was in front of Haman, just wouldn't do it. That made Haman absolutely livid. He started digging into Mordecai's background and found out he was Jewish. He became convinced the Jewish people were plotting something, that they were deceptive and a real threat to the Persian Empire. So Haman decided to push for the destruction of all the Jews across all of King Ahasuerus' territories. And since he had the king's official seal, he was in a position to make that happen.
Haman sent out a letter to all the provinces and lands under Persian control, calling for the destruction of the Jewish people. He even sealed it with the king's own seal to make it official. When Mordecai found out what Haman had set in motion, he was completely devastated. He tore his clothes, put on sackcloth, covered himself in ashes, and went right into the middle of the city crying out in anguish. People saw him like that and figured he was grieving over the fate of the Jews, but there was more to it. He was actually trying to get a message to Esther about what Haman was up to. See, Esther lived in the women's quarters of the palace, pretty cut off from everyone else. With all the noise and commotion Mordecai was making, she caught wind that something serious was happening behind the scenes. She knew what was going on, but she couldn't just walk in and talk to the king. The law was clear. If you went to the king without being summoned, you could be put to death. She pretended to beg the king and act like she missed him. But really, she was scheming. She dressed in a way that would get his attention and stir up his feelings. She played her part perfectly, using every trick she knew to get close to him, until she was finally able to touch his golden scepter. And that was a big deal, because according to Persian law, nobody but the king was supposed to touch it. After he'd had some wine and was totally charmed, he asked her what she wanted and promised to give it to her. She answered with all her cleverness, saying she wanted him to throw a banquet and invite Haman. and make sure Mordecai was stationed at the door. The king agreed. The feast was arranged, and Mordecai came back. When Haman walked in and saw Mordecai there, he was shocked and furious. Right then and there, he decided to have a gallows built so he could have Mordecai hanged.
The next day, the king was reading from the Book of Remembrance when he noticed someone had added a note about Mordecai's honors and wisdom. Esther kept talking to him, using such graceful and gentle words that he agreed to honor Mordecai. That's when she finally told him about Haman's plan to wipe out the Jewish people and how much trouble that would bring. The king got really angry and upset, and he asked her who would dare do something like that without his say-so. Esther told him it was Haman, that he'd taken the king's own ring and made plans to destroy her people. The king shouted out loud and demanded Haman be brought to him, his eyes full of fury.
When Haman found out what was going on, he rushed to Esther, hoping she could use her influence to stop the king's decision. She asked him to do something to change the king's mind, and he agreed without really understanding her plan. She had already arranged to meet with the king. So Haman went in, and then King Ahasuerus walked in on them. The king saw Haman standing there near the bed, with Esther looking at him with this mix of fear and anger. That set the king off, and he immediately ordered Haman to be hanged. Esther told him, "Your Majesty, hang him on the very gallows he built for Mordecai." So Esther managed to get rid of her people's enemy, using his own desires against him, and he ended up on the same gallows he'd prepared for her cousin and mentor, Mordecai. Esther went to the king afterward crying, and she fell at his feet, begging him to cancel Haman's orders to kill the Jews. So he gave her the okay and made her queen. She wrote up a letter in King Ahasuerus' name and sealed it with his ring. He sent out riders on horseback to stop the killing. Mordecai went out in front of the king wearing royal white clothes, a huge gold crown, and a purple robe. He ended up as second in command over all the Persian kingdoms. Esther became Persia's leading queen, and the Jewish people lived there with a real sense of hope, joy, and respect. After that, the Persians and the Jews became allies, and that's how things stayed. This whole story is the heart of the Jewish holiday, Purim, which happens every year just after midnight on March 10th. Purim gets its name from the lots that were cast by the leaders who thought they could trick and control everyone.
The whole celebration goes on for 2 full days, and they read the book out loud twice during that time. But a lot of Christians think it's just a made-up story, mostly because God's name isn't mentioned anywhere in it. Some priests see that as a sign of divine planning, though. The Qumran community back in the day didn't accept it as legitimate either. Rejecting this book kind of hides a big secret, because if you really look into it, the story shows how clever and deceptive people can be. It lays out the ways kings and rulers have tried to manipulate things and take over, and it points to this lasting connection between Jewish people and Persia. The Scroll of Esther is the 5th book in the Tanakh, and it's a really major one in the Talmud in the Old Testament. It is of utmost importance and reverence to Jews, as it literally reveals the methods of treason, espionage, and the use of attractive women to achieve their goals.
And so, after thousands of years, the Scroll of Esther continues to travel through time, not just as a manuscript, but as a question. Was it simply the story of a beautiful queen who saved her people? Or was it something much deeper, a political blueprint disguised as a holy text? Maybe that's why every empire that held this scroll refused to let it go. Maybe that's why it keeps disappearing and reappearing, always at moments of great change. But one thing is certain. History is not just written in stone tablets and royal seals. Sometimes it's written in secrets, meant only for those who dare to look closer.
If you want to uncover more stories like this, the hidden books, the forbidden alliances, the manuscripts that shaped the world from the shadows, then make sure to hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on the notifications. Because the next story I'm about to reveal is even deeper than this one.